No one likes to be shot to death in Overwatch before making it into glorious combat, so in this video we'll talk through some ways that you can avoid that. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Now Overwatch is a particularly punishing mechanic for melee armies in 40k, particularly those who are relatively fragile to enemy fire, where a lucky flurry of sixes on an Overwatch could leave a melee unit absolutely devastated, whether or not it even makes a successful charge this turn. On top of this, some armies or entire factions are particularly potent in Overwatch, the Tau being the prime example, but factions like Iron Hands being particularly nasty as well. Any faction with big single models, such as Knights, are quite intimidating to charge due to the amounts of guns that they point at you. And if you've got any way of accessing full rerolls to hit, such as Space Marine Chapter Masters, Overwatch only gets stronger. So let's go through a few different ways that you can use to avoid your units being shot to bits while they're trying to get into close combat. I'd just like to caveat this first with saying that sometimes taking a bit of Overwatch isn't the worst idea in the world. If your unit's reasonably durable, or some of the ways that you're going to have to mitigate Overwatch involve making your charge range a lot longer, it might well just be best to try and take the Overwatch, which I do feel that sometimes players overestimate how bad it's going to be. For example, people tend to be very hesitant about defensive gunners on my guard tanks, which does make them hit on 5s for a slightly more scary Overwatch, and in general you will take a little bit of damage from that coming in. In my experience though, it's very rarely enough of a big deal to actually make a big impact in the game, and it sometimes leads to opponents making strange decisions and taking some of these mitigating steps when they don't really need to. It would have been far worse for me if they just charged from right up close and guaranteed them make it into close combat, rather than charging out of line of sight from a little way away and then failing the charge because you've positioned your models too far back. So sometimes taking Overwatch is the most sensible thing you can do. Now let's get into ways of actually mitigating it. First of all, you're often able to outrange some of the most potent weapons for Overwatch. Flamers are a great example. They're generally 8-inch range through 40k, and they auto hit, meaning that you really don't want to be charging them most of the time. If the Flamer Overwatch is too great, and you really can't afford to take that sort of damage, then simply setting your charging unit up so they're just greater than 8 inches away in the movement phase will mean that they'll be able to have a long charge absolutely safe from those Flamers. Sure, they'll be a fair bit less likely to get in, but at least you know for sure that they won't be barbecued to death in your own charge phase. If you have multiple units charging, you could charge one unit from greater than 8 inches away, then if they are successful in the charge, then you can charge with a unit that's closer. Now all of the weapons have been locked up in close combat and they're now unable to shoot Overwatch. Another similar tactic with this are multi-model infantry units. When these guys have short range, you might be able to outrange some of them, if not the whole squad. Say if you're charging a Space Marine unit that's full of melter guns and you really don't want to be taking melter gun Overwatch, you might be able to position yourself just within range of some of them, but if the unit's nice and spread out, you might be able to outdistance a fair bunch of them. So you might not be able to completely get rid of the Overwatch threat, but at least you could cut it in half or something by charging from one end of the unit. Next we have the tried and tested option of charging from out of line of sight, such as this crafty orc is doing to this clueless Space Marine Devastator Centurion. Ruin walls are absolutely amazing for this, particularly in ITC formats where they always block line of sight to bottom floor ruins. So if you set up your infantry or fly units on one side of these ruin walls, the enemy won't be able to target them in the Overwatch phase, and they can hopefully get in while avoiding any nasty firepower. Again, this can be quite handy if you do have multiple units charging. You could keep a support character a bit further back behind these out of line of sight ruins, try and charge the unit in question, and if they make it and then they lock up the whole unit, and then any other units in line of sight can charge them. Vertical ruins on multiple floors can also be a decent source of line of sight blocking cover. If you're charging from directly above or below the enemy unit, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to see them if you are in a ruin with multiple floors. In some situations, say if you have a transport vehicle that's a very solid line of sight blocking piece, such as a Rhino tank maybe, you might be able to park it in front of the unit that's just about to charge, so your opponent can't actually see that unit because it's out of sight behind the Rhino. It's quite rare that this will be possible, due to how 8th line of sight is very rewarding and very easy to gain it, but sometimes with small characters hiding behind particularly solid vehicles such as Rhino tanks, you might be able to break line of sight to a key charge. If you can't avoid Overwatch, then one option is to soak it up, using more durable or numerous units to soak the Overwatch threat, to allow a slightly more fragile melee unit to get in where you want every single one of them alive to be able to strike in close combat. Transport vehicles are an absolutely amazing source of this, as they tend to be quite durable point for point, and once they've got your fighter unit to the front line, they don't really have all that great a purpose anymore, so throwing them in to soak up the Overwatch and keep your fighter unit safe one last time can be a great use for them when they do get to the front. Big horde units are also great for this. Say if you had some Orc Gretchen, they could charge in first and take the Overwatch for a squad of more elite Orcs, or some Genestealer Cult Neophytes to soak up some damage for some Aberrants or something. Potentially characters can even be a decent source of doing this, as sometimes you're not going to care too much if a character takes 2 or 3 wounds, whereas it might be a really big deal for an elite melee unit that's going to drop their damage output significantly over the next turn. Of course, some armies and factions have special rules that prevent Overwatch. These are all going to be absolutely faction specific, but there's all sorts of warlord traits, relics and psychic powers that can stop Overwatch on various enemy units, and plenty of stratagems that can too. Notable examples include the Angel's Wing for the Blood Angels, their relic jump pack that allows their smash captains to get into close combat utterly unscathed. If you have such a powerful rule for a unit that completely ignores Overwatch, then it's usually worth declaring every single unit that you can as a charge to make your charge options as wide and varied as possible. Some warlord traits can do it. I believe the Genestealer Cults and the Raven Guard have one, unless I'm getting it confused with their relics, and some psychic powers can also suppress Overwatch, such as Genestealer Cult Mass Hypnosis, or the new Orc Blood Axe power from Saga of the Beast. There are also units that have Overwatch avoidance mechanics built into their datasheet, such as Space Marine Suppressors, where if they shoot at a unit and kill one enemy model in it, then that unit can't fire Overwatch till the end of the turn, or Eldar Howling Banshees that just ignore it outright because they scream too loud. If the aim of your charge phase isn't necessarily to deal damage to the target, but more just to lock it up in close combat and prevent it shooting in the next turn, then it can often be better to, instead of charging the unit directly, just charge a unit that's right next door to it, take their much reduced Overwatch, and then just pile in and consolidate into the unit that you actually want to lock up. This is most easily done with big units, who have a lot of freedom where they go with the charge due to their footprint being so big. Say if you had a mob of Orc Boys that wanted to lock up a Space Marine Centurion unit, you could perhaps just declare a charge on some nearby scouts. Provided you move at least one Orc Boy into 1-inch range of the scouts, the rest can go absolutely where they like in the charge phase. Just have them hover 1 inch outside the Space Marine Centurion unit, and when it comes to your pile-in, you're free to pile in towards the closest model in any case, locking up the Centurions. They won't be able to attack the Centurions as they didn't nominate them as a target of the charge, but sometimes that's a better thing as you don't really want to be taking a million bolter shots. For a situation when your opponent's army is a lot more spread out, it's worth bearing in mind any fight twice stratagems that you have access to be able to help with this. They're generally a bit pricey, but sometimes they can be worth it just to be able to get into melee with an enemy unit and just lock it up and stop it shooting for a turn. Say after that Orc Boy mob has charged the scouts and they weren't anywhere near the Space Marine Centurions, maybe if they killed the scouts in close combat with their melee, used their pile-in to get close to the Centurions, and then paid the 3 command points to activate again, which they can do as they've charged that turn, you'd basically get an extra free 3-inch pile-in and 3-inch consolidate, and in theory get them 6 inches closer to their intended target that they want to lock up. Price in terms of command points, but if it's the difference between your army being shot to bits or not, then it could well be worth it. Another potential way that this can be fairly effective is if you manage to pile in and wrap and trap a unit on one of your turns. If your opponent doesn't move far enough away from it, you could potentially kill that unit in their turn and then pile in and consolidate into the next unit. This can be particularly problematic for Tau armies, as it might mean that you can ping melee units from one Tau unit to another without ever having to take their scary Overwatch. Talking of Tau, I thought that we'd just briefly mention them towards the end of the video, as they are a bit of a special case and have the scariest Overwatch in the game. For the greater good allows them to Overwatch with any units that are within 6 inches of the one that's being charged, although those units that choose to do this won't be able to Overwatch any other time this turn. This means that if you have Riptides and Broadsides behind some Fire Warriors, then provided there's at least one Fire Warrior within 6 inches of each suit, they will be able to Overwatch, and often at 5+, because they typically tend to be Tau-sept. You should absolutely employ as many of the tricks as we've already talked about to try and avoid all this Overwatch, but it's also helpful to think about spotting units that aren't quite as well supported by others, and hopefully try and pick those as the targets to first go into and destroy. It can also be worth trying to get multiple units to charge all at once, as each Tau unit can only use for the greater good once in each charge phase, so if they use it then they won't be able to Overwatch any further, so after you've taken the first set of brutal Overwatch, hopefully it should become less and less if you can get lots and lots of targets lining up for a charge. With melee armies versus Tau though, it's very much going to be trying to apply every single option that you have available, between outranging, outline of sighting, soaking, and special rules, as well as bearing in mind for the greater good. So I hope that's been some help to talk through the different options, and can just give you a little bit to think about when you're trying to get your melee units into the cavalry gun lines of the enemy. If you can think of any other tips or tricks that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments below. It's always good to expand the knowledge of the game, and as always, please correct me if I've made any errors. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We have regular 40k content coming out every single day, including plenty of general tactics videos like this. If you'd like to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon page, which is one of the main ways that I can keep making these videos so regularly. If you are watching a lot of these videos, then any support is greatly appreciated. There are some benefits, including regular early video uploads, voting on which sort of videos you'd like to see next, and occasional prize draws. If any of that interests you, please take a look in the description below, and of course a massive thank you to my current Patreons for making this channel possible. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.